agenda, or grab the agenda up there. The first thing that we're going to talk about is location and viewing of the work group. We discussed it as after the meeting, after our last meeting, and we feel that we're being transparent with the YouTube. People can view it on YouTube. We also think that the Zoom option for people that are part of the work group is appropriate, and that all of these things are published on the LCPR website. So it's not on the legislative calendar, but it is available to the public via the LCPR website. And then people are also still welcome to come. We just ask that if there's going to be a large group that they deal with the LCPR staff and allowing them to know that there's going to be a large group here. So if we need an extra room or something like that, that they come. So does that kind of meet everybody's expectations and wants and needs? We're trying to make it as open as possible, but we're trying to make it so that we can get the work done that needs to get done. So, all right. Any other questions or opening statements that people would like to make? If not, we'll get moving on. All right, we're going to do an overview. Aaron Leonard is going to do an overview of Minnesota State Retirement Systems Combined Service Units.
So there's or something that looks like this in your materials. And there's a lot of numbers here, so I'm going to explain them and also explain why I included them. Because I think sometimes conceptually we think something works a certain way, but when you actually look at the numbers, it may not work if you think about it. So the first is the hypothetical calculation, and for these examples, I used our MSRS general plan and correctional plans because they have a special provision called mixed service, where the other plans all have combined service weeklies. So this is a hypothetical calculation for a person at age 55 retiring from the correctional plan with some general plan service. You'll notice, so they're 55, they have a high five of $75,000, they have 10 years general plan, 15 years correctional, and then this is not how we would calculate it, but this is how it would be under CSA. And for all of these examples, I used a single life benefit. So that's only payable for the members' lifetime. I didn't do any reductions for survivor benefits because that just adds another complexity, and that's a very individualized choice. So in this example, the person is in the general plan for 10 years. So they get 17% of their high five. But if they collected at age 55 under CSA, because they have to collect within 1 year of collecting their correctional plan, there's a 65% reduction for that. So their annual benefit at age 55 from the general plan is around $4,400. The correctional plan is at a 2.2% multiplier, so 33% of their high five, so $24,750. So look at a total of $29,000. I did also project forward with 1.5% COLAs, so you can see kind of the growth as they get closer to Social Security age. So roughly the range under CSA would be about $29,000 up to $34,000 at age 66. So that is that example. But with MSRS, we actually have something in our laws that we call mixed service. It's not defined as mixed service in the statutes. So it's a term, I did a lot of looking back at things from the 1970s, a term that was coined internally at MSRS. But basically what it is the general plan and the correctional plan are in the same chapter of law. And they have the same definition of a high five salary. And so the law specifically states that if you are retiring under the general plan or the correctional plan, you have to use the same high five, and it doesn't matter when you start collecting. So they don't have that 1 year collecting within 1 year requirement for those two plans. And then there's also no 6-month service requirement like there is with CSA, but they do still need to be invested, in the plan to get the benefit. Does that make sense?
So were you saying that if somebody retires at 55 from their corrections plan, they can't hold the money in the general plan till they're 66 because of that 1 year requirement?
So currently with CETA combined service annuity, you would need to collect both benefits within 1 year in order to use the highest high five. This does not require that collecting within 1 year. So you could collect at 55 from a correctional plan and defer to 66 for your general plan. I can show you examples.
That's coming.
Yep. So the first hypothetical is, someone like collecting at 55 from correctional and deferring to 62 for general plan. So I chose 62 because that's the earliest you can also collect Social Security. It's often a common retirement age. So the same example, same years of service, same 5, but instead they would have a 31% reduction because they're collecting at age 62 instead of age 55. So at age 55, their total annual income would be $24,750 because they're only collecting from their correctional plan. At age 62, they would start their general plan benefit, and that would be $87.62. So their total income would be $36,410. And then at 66, after increases, that's what the total goes up to $38,545. So that's that example. And then, like Dar was mentioning, you can also defer to 66 on the next example. So they would be collecting lower amounts from the correctional, total income, because the correctional plan's only benefit they're going to receive until they reach age 66. But then when they reach age 66, you can see that that general plan benefit doesn't have the reduction, so $12,000 annually. So the total combined income is greater at that point. But if someone were to do that, they're going to have to bridge the income gap either with other work if they need that income, or using deferred comp or other savings to bridge that. Does that make sense? Are we clear? The other thing I just wanted to bring to the group's attention is that in our correctional plan, and this could be something that the group could consider, we have an accelerated benefit. So a person, when they retire at age 55 in the correctional plan, can choose to accelerate their benefit or receive more from age 55 to 62, and then their benefit goes down. So it's a way to kind of provide some income during that period in which they can't collect Social Security, and they may not have other, their general plan or other income. So this is an example of that. So the same basic background with the high 5 in service. So in this example, you can see that the accelerated benefit is higher. So it's 33% higher. So they start at 31,000, but then when they get to age 62, it goes down. But then you can add in the general plan benefit because you're waiting to collect that. And so your total income remains more steady. So there's a lot of flexibility, a lot of options on once a person gets to that retirement age to make sure that they have the income they need when they're in retirement. The last example is that same accelerated benefit, but we also have the accelerated benefit to 65. So a person could take a lower amount from 55 to 65, then it would, or a higher amount from 55 to 65, and then it would go down. Because it's a 10-year period, it's not as big of a bump as the accelerated to 62. So you can see that also remains more steady from an income perspective, if that helps to achieve. And then the final slide is really just a summary of all of those numbers. So you can see that the range in benefits can vary. So in the age 55 example, it ranges from $24,750 when you're deferring the general plan, because you're only getting correctional, up to $31,030, which is that deferred, or you defer your general and you get the accelerated to 62. Similarly, the annual benefit so there's a range that you can select based on your income needs and supplementing it with other savings potentially if you need to do so.
So is this available to all people in the plan, or is it people who are towards the end? You know what I'm saying? So it's someone who's 55 or older or getting close to retirement?
So the mixed service option is available to everyone in the plan that is eligible to retire. So if they have to be age 55, well, I did 55 because that's full retirement age. Technically, they could retire at 50, take a lower plan benefit, but still defer their general plan.
And is it a case by case, like each person can choose which way to go?
This is all dependent on when you elect to retire. So your retirement date and selection and choices are all individualized to you based on the parameters of the plan. So you could come into age 56 in 6 months, say, I want to retire, if that's allowed in your plan, and then this calculation be specific to you.
Like I said, on page 8, same thing. So these are all based on the same service and the same final average salary. It's just all about distribution options. All be considered actuarially equivalent.
So the accelerated benefit is the actuarial equivalent. The reduction for general plan is actuarial equivalent.
Good questioner. So if I understand you correctly on this, it's kind of like an all part So depending on when you started your service, under which plan, when you're ending your service, what you've accrued during your career, and then you're gonna sit down with the person, you go file your paperwork and figure out which scenario works best for your financial picture.
Yes, so we provide estimates to folks before, so like you could call in and say, I want to get these 3 ages, and we would do this calculation specific to you. And then when you retire, you can either choose to do it on your own, or you can come in and talk to somebody and go through the options.
So, Aaron, can I ask then, so we're not being asked as part of the plan design kind of notions to have to pick like 2 of these or anything like that. This is available to any pensioner.
These specific provisions are available to just check. Well, the general plan doesn't have an accelerated benefit. That's not an option. It's only a correction. The mixed service is only available to general plan and correction plan. So if the group wanted to decide to do the CSA model, they could do that, but then there's going to be the bigger reduction, and they can't use the high 5 unless you collect within a year. Or we could use this mixed service example as a model to potentially allow folks to collect one benefit earlier and wait later, but not affect their high 5. So it's something that the group might want to consider. And then the other thing is, our statute gives the board authority to choose the survivor options available. So our board chose to do the accelerated benefit. But you could also, as a group, say, we want to make sure that's available to folks if that's something that the group feels that would be helpful to individuals.
Any other questions for Aaron? Thank you. We'll work on bullet point number 3 here, status update and satisfying work. Thank you. He's gonna picture of that.
Yeah, so we thought it would just be helpful to sort of do a check-in, kind of the last time we walked through what the session law said and sort of what the work group was mandated to do was the first meeting where I think everyone was just getting their bearings. So I just wanted to do sort of an update for you all. And so you have 2 documents. You have the actual session law itself, which is like 2nd page, subdivision 3 is really where the mandate is. But then also we put together just a chart that has the same information, but also sort of what we've already talked about and what we still need to discuss. And so just looking at the chart, sort of this first page is really all of the features of the pension plan. And on our draft agenda for the next meeting, that's what we sort of have planned to discuss. But I think when we get to maybe the end of the agenda today and talking about the next meeting, people still feel like there's information needed before we get to making sort of decision. That's potentially about what else do we need on agendas or what more information can we be giving you all. But that's sort of the first page. The second page was sort of everything that the work group needed to consider. And so I have a study prepared by Para that we heard about on the 18th. The financial impact, again, Para discussed that at least for them on the 18th. The option for members to purchase credits for past service, and that we just heard
And then we will be talking about today pre-funding benefit of improvements, and that's the memo that Susan sent around. And then also today, at time, any other public safety adjacent positions that should be included in any pension plans, how those should be defined. And so we've heard from the forensic scientists already when we had our presentations. We've had one other group reach out and send a memo with sort of information about their group. And we have one person who's available on Zoom to answer questions today, if we get to that item. And then the balance of employer and employee contributions, we have that scheduled for the next meeting. And then sort of the bill that started this all, we talked about at the first meeting. And that's available in those agenda items. And I did also just want to mention, kind of related, in the additional information, which is a section of this agenda, there were 2 documents. And we'll kind of keep this as a running list of things we won't necessarily discuss at this meeting, but is good information for you all to look at and understand. So the first one has just a comparison of sort of features of MSR plans. You're looking at kind of what features should these new plans have, that can kind of be a guidepost. And the second one is looking forward to next week or whenever we get to the point of defining probation officer, 911 telecommunicator. What should those definitions be? Scott Mann asked Susan and I to come up with some definitions just as a starting point. So we've done that. It's a long memo, but we are going to start discussing that at the next meeting. I wanted to get you all sort of thinking about what those definitions could be, what they look like. So we could hopefully have a good productive conversation around that. And I will take no offense if I've drafted things that make no sense to anybody, but so feedback is always welcome on those sorts of things. But those are the 2 documents sort of at the end that will be helpful as we try to work our way through this mandate. Hopefully we'll have time to look at.
Perfect. Any questions from you? All right, going on to number 4, option and method for members to purchase credit or past service. Mr. Doug Anderson.
Well, I'll speak related to the era experience. And MSRS. I just have 5 slides to go through, so if we go on to the next one. We've referenced the para-correctional plan a few times, so just wanted to kind of get it on one page, both some things that we've talked about. So this is really our only experience with a new plan. I guess we did have a new plan experience back in 1931, but I don't really know how that was going out. It's expired in 1959. But this one is, I think somewhat similar about a group seeking better benefits. The effective date of this plan was July 1, 1999. Again, we talked about some of this with our combined service presentation a few sessions ago. But what happened is it really kind of bifurcated their benefit, that whatever benefit accrual service they had at the effective date stayed in the general plan, and the provisions of the general plan applied to that benefit. And prospectively, the provisions of the correctional plan, which is a higher multiplier and the earlier unreduced benefit, applied to service after the effective date. 2 kind of exceptions to that is that all vesting service is considered by both plans. So no matter when they started their employment, vesting service will count in the general plan and the correctional plan. And the final average salary applies to both plans too. So these are the combined service provisions and the combined by more than one fund. Coverage by more than one fund. And there is no past service purchase options in the correction. So it's not part of the plan. Purchase past service or have past service apply. Where we do have some experience with past service purchases, and para, there's really two examples. They both relate to military service. One is a federal requirement, USERRA. It's limited to military service that occurs during para-covered employment. The purchase must be made within a time period. The purchase is made by the member and the employer, and they pay their respective contribution rates applied to the salary that would have been earned during that service purchase period. Plus interest. These are pretty specific federal rules. We're not prepared today right now to go into great detail on it, but we have a ton of information on our website that gives you the details about this. The other thing is really kind of something that, let's say, kind of wraps around the USERRA. This was a statute specific to para. Now I'm sure in MSR is now too. But it came about in 2019, and it expanded the military service that can be purchased to include service prior to para coverage. And it expanded the time period in which to make the purchase, so it could be purchased later beyond the provisions of USERRA. But whatever that additional cost is paid by the member. And it's the actuarially equivalent of the benefit that's gained by them. That's the distinction. So they can buy more, buy it later, buy it at a different time, but they have to pay the full cost. Then we have, this is an example of actuarial present value. This would be, this one example I'll show you is a member age 60 with 30 years of service, and it's comparing the benefit from the general plan, or also known as coordinated plan, with a new plan benefit, which for this calculation, I'm assuming it's a 2.2% multiplier and an unreduced benefit at age 60. So the first row, their general plan benefit is based on 30 years of service. They use final average salary of 100,000 to make it a nice, even, easy to follow number. The multiplier is 1.7%. That means this person's eligible for a $51,000 annual benefit at the unreduced retirement age of 66. If they choose to take it earlier at age 60, because it's paid for a longer time and it hasn't been funded, it needs to be reduced because of additional payments. So the early retirement reduction factor is applied, and their annual benefit would be $29,550. So when we talk about actuarial equivalence, what that means is $51,000 payable at age 66 is actuarially equivalent to $29,550 paid at age 60. Should be of equal value to that member, unless they know something about their longevity. So they may choose based on that. And then the present value of $29,550, if we convert what's the current value at age 60 of that lifetime of payments based on 7% investment return assumption and the mortality tables that our actuary applies, the present value is $355,000. So those are three things that are all actuarially equivalent. 51,000 at age 66 is the same as 29,550 a year at age 60, which is the same as 355,000 in a lump sum at age 60. If there's a new plan and that new plan applies to past service, it's the same process, except it's a bigger multiplier, 2.2% instead of 1.7. And there's no reduction for early retirement. See, that's where where it's a very valuable change to the member. So the benefit at age 60 is 66,000. The present value of that is 794,000. So that's the additional cost to the plan if this change goes into effect and it applies to passers. Or, and then there's a question, well, who would pay for the past service? That's a big question to determine. Questions? This next one is, this has got a lot of numbers on it. But it was really, we looked at this back in the year we did the 911 telecommunicator study. We also looked at it with the probation officers group a year or more ago. And it's just looking at how does this calculation come through for different ages and different years of service. So the older someone is and the more years of service they have, the past service, the more valuable past service is, the higher the cost is to pay for that. And so this is broken down in 5-year increments by age increments on the left-hand side. Years of service increments on the top. And, you know, so I'll just pick an example that if we're looking at someone with 20 to 24 years of service, somewhere in that range, and let's say that they're 50 to 54 years old in that range. What that box there tells us is that the average pay for people in that group is $98,254. So that's actually from the study. So the actuary provided that was like an actual data for this group. The average cost for that past service, $435,000. And the thing that's kind of shaded in there is the cost compared to the pay. It's kind of like a multiple that past service cost for that person is almost 4.5 times their annual salary to pay. But we wanted to show this to show the wide range of results from low service, high service, and young age at purchase to someone closer to retirement age at purpose, at purchase.
Doug, could you again say what the in that case, the 435,000 represents the what again?
That's the average cost for that employee, the average value of that benefit. So kind of go back to the previous page, is the equivalent of that 439,000. So what I want to be clear is that the calculation shown here is actually pretty accurate. These are using like actual factors that we have. So this would be really close to reality. The one on the next page was just kind of rough calculations, mostly just intended to show how it changes over time, over service and over.
So the number was the difference that would need to be made up.
Yeah, so you got it's the additional value to the member, which is also then the cost that would need to be provided, paid by someone to fund for that additional benefit.
So the average difference in present value
The average difference in present value.
or the cost of that service and make it actual.
Again, this one's more precise, but the other one is a bit more crude at this point. It's just to show how much we can range.
I'm sorry. So is that's bringing all their service and that's calculating the cost of all their service, correct? Okay.
And then on the last page is really a lot of the questions to consider. So we're not coming with answers to these, depending right now to go through each of these, but just, these are the questions as they relate to past service. So is it automatically built into the plan provisions? In other words, is it going to be, this new plan will provide past service to everyone, period? Or is it an individual choice, which, I don't know, Alina, you may be talking about that, whether that's even an option within the plan, or if it's viewed like they'd have to fund that outside the plan. Big question really is automatic or up to the individual. Question about partial past service, or, is that an option? Would you say an individual could, there's a limit of 5 years, we'll go back 5 years. The big one is who's going to pay? Is it the individual member? Is it an increased contribution rate that's applied to current members in the future, or even future members that are coming in? Then paid by the employers, and the local taxpayers of Para, or the legislature, or whatever combination, big question. The purchase timing. The individual example that I showed was easier to do because that assumes someone does the purchase when they retire. And you know what their service is, but you also know their final average salary, the age of buying service. But if someone's choosing to buy service at, say, age 30, that's going to increase the future benefit. You have to make an assumption about what is that future benefit, what is their future salary at that time. Questions related to that. Taxability. The way of funding it needs to match the way it's distributed. So if it's pre-tax funding, it's going to be pre-tax funding and pre-tax benefit, or post-tax funding and post-tax benefit. And then the question of what precedent does this send if you're doing it in this plan? There's a lot of different instances of other members of other plans. Like correctional plan just had the increase in multiplier for 5 years ago. Could they say, well, we want to purchase that higher multiplier to pass for our past service? Or if people in the general plan say there's a new COLA formula, we want past service purchase to do a higher COLA on our past service. It can create a lot of questions for other groups to follow. That's what we had.
Any questions for Doug?
A little step outside, just a question on the multiplier. I was asking David, we're assuming 2.2 in some of these proposals. I don't remember that being the assumption in the legislative statutory language. Was that something that was just decided by how we were doing the actuary analysis? Because that might be something to put a pin in, depending on how we are funding everything and what the total cost of everything is. I wonder how much by changing that multiplier to be something in between 1.7 and 2.2 if they're seeing.
A couple answers. Go ahead. A two-part answer, I guess. I think one is we've looked at different requests from different groups. So some have requested 2.2, some have requested 1.9. When we met with Senator Seeberger and a group of stakeholders about what do we want our actuary to study, 2.2 was the multiplier pick. So Para's not putting on anything as like, this is what Para thinks the right thing should be. And I understand there's some inconsistency at times, but how this is presented. And then so in this example, this is one that's like very easy to prorate. So you could just say, but let's go, how about 1.95? Okay, because that's easy, because that's halfway between these. If it's 1.95, it's a number, but you could prorate anywhere between and prorate that cost. So a multiplier is pretty easy to prorate results, the accurate providing. What's not as easy to prorate is changing the unreduced retirement age, whether it's 5, 60, You can kind of do it a little bit, but it's not as. that- no.
I'm not an actuary, so let me just put that out there right now. I think I understand this. I probably don't, but I think I do. What would be the easiest way, because when I look at this, I know the rest of the folks maybe watching right now are gonna go, okay, how does this apply to me? How much do I have, what kind of check do I have to write out to buy back my all my service? What's the easiest way for people to calculate that? What I learned here just is about 4.5 times your salary.
Well, go to the next, go on the next page, next chart. So anyone could look this up right now. They could say, they could go to what their age group is on the left. They can go to what service group they are on the top. Find that box. And whatever you see in green there is like, it's a multiple of your pay, your current pay is the estimate. So I see the cursor kind of hovering over 238. So that means someone in that group, someone who's got 15 to 19 years, somewhere in the 45 to 49 would have to pay in the ballpark of 2.5% of their current salary to get their 10, 15 years.
So if you're like me and been around for 33 years and on the short side of 60 years old, that's a big check.
Now we're looking further down, we're looking in the darker green numbers down at the bottom. For 4 times salary, 5 times salary.
Got it, thank you.
This is just going back to Matt's question, about what the bill says. The bill had nothing to do with the multiplier ultimately. There was no number in there. It was just a benefit at least 60 or 35 years of service. And then the percentages that were changing were the contribution percentage. So there was nothing in the bill that had a multiplier already, decided or anybody put on that.
I appreciate that. And just to put a double pin in that, not that that's for today, but it could be, as we hear from some of the reps on here, with a prioritization towards something like past service, we see how costly that can be. If we change some of these things, it might give us more flexibility on that past service. That would be possible.
And if I may just add to that point, so, it looks different for MSRS than it does for PERA, right? Because the general plan is a 1.9 multiplier. We have these sub plans, which are perhaps it's 2 or whatever the case may be. So PERA might be 1, MSRS could be different.
Any questions for Doug?
So there's a handout, or something on the screen. So back during the telecommunicators discussion, we prepared these calculations and I just pulled them out because they're very similar. So the MSRS correctional plan originally was established only for correctional officers and security officers, and then it was slowly expanded between 1975 and 2007. We have some added occasionally every year. So in 2007, there was a really big expansion of membership into the correctional plan. And those folks were switching from the general plan to the correctional plan based on their job classification, and the fact that they were in contact with the incarcerated folks or the patients 75% of the time. So that had to be determined and argued. So 2007, about 80 people transferred from general to correctional. So we looked at the average age of those folks that transferred, as well as their service and a few other things, and did the calculation of the cost to transfer. So in existing law, if someone is determined to be part of they're originally the general plan and they are determined they should be part of the correctional plan, they meet that contact requirement. We already have a provision on purchasing past service. So the employer would have to agree that yes, indeed, they did meet that past service requirement, that they were indeed doing those duties and in contact with the incarcerated folks or patients. And then we have a calculation that we follow if that's determined. So it is the difference in contributions plus interest. So the general plan contribution is 6%. For the employee, the correctional plan is 9.6%. So about 3.5% more. The employer contribution is also significantly different. So it's the difference between the two plus the assumed rate of return at the interest level. So the 7%. So that's one calculation. Or the difference in present value, which Doug just explained a lot about difference in present value, whichever is greater. Sometimes your contributions plus interest when you're in younger ages is more expensive than the difference in present value because you haven't earned all that credit yet. That makes sense so far? Okay. So in this expansion, the first example, the median service of individual, the employee with 42 years and 2 years of service with a salary of $70,000. So this was actually the median service. The difference in employee contributions was just under $6,000. So contributions plus interest. The difference in employer contributions was just over $17,000. So the total purchase requirement was either $23,000 for split between the employee and employer, depending on the situation, or the difference in present value, which was almost $163,000 difference in present value. So that's someone at age 42 with 2 years of service. So pretty significant, even though it's only 2 years of service, there's a pretty significant difference in the present value because they're going to collect at 55 in this example instead of 66. That makes sense. Okay. So the next example is an employee with 4 years of service. So this is the average service and salary of a current correctional plan member. So our current membership in 2023. So that difference is $176,926. But you can see that the difference in contributions plus interest is much more because there's 4 years of service for contributions rather than 2 years. And just to give you, go ahead.
Just so I understand this, and the options for doing this. So if you're gonna, let's take the first example, if you're gonna buy the fast scratch. For E, I need to come up with almost $6,000 in pocket. You have the agreement. That one option, whatever you want to do. State was to pay for it, because it's gonna come out of the legislature. Legislature, would they have to come up with those same amounts or come up with 60?
So in that example, the person would have to pay the $162,000 because the law says the greater of the two. So because contributions plus interest is smaller than the greater present value, whoever is deemed the payor in that case would have to pay the $162,000.
So if we wanted the legislature to pay, let's say that's the sum. We have $162,000.
For this one person
To make up 2 years.
to make up 2 years.
Okay, that's what I just want to make sure I was clear.
Yeah. If these benefits are valued.
It's more than their salary for 2 years.
Right, because the difference is it's projecting the difference in present value in the future. So they'll have all those, it's assuming that they're going to work until the end.
Aaron, can I ask you, is it fair to say that the real cost is earlier retirement versus like an increased multiplier?
Past service, past they're both going to be expensive. I would say early retirement can be more expensive depending on the age because you're collecting for a longer period of time, but you're getting your payment earlier. Multiplier change, if you do a prospective, it's fairly reasonably, it's like our multiplier change this year costs under 1% of pay. Prospective, yes, so no past service, prospective.
No option to buy back. Sorry.
Yes, the example that we showed for para. So the increasing the multiplier 1.7 to 2.2, that increased the benefit about 30%. Not having an early retirement reduction factor, 6 years, more than doubled. the benefit. So that's like a 55, 60% increase. So it is at least in this example that we were showing, it's the value of an unreduced benefit is much more valuable.
And then just so we're starting to look at data related to the actual members of the current plan and retirees. So the average age of corrections agents in the state, so the probation officers, I don't have the 911 folks yet. Average age is 45. So a little bit older than this group. So it would be more expensive potentially. Our oldest corrections agent is actually over age 66, which is kind of surprised. But and then the average service of the group is around 13 years. And the maximum service is over 36 years. And so these examples just kind of show
how are you looking at those people as individuals if they worked for multiple corrections? Like, so maybe they were probation in Washington County for a few years, then in Oka County. Do you have that history?
I don't have anything with counties. I only have they work for the state. Yeah.
So bad misspeak there.
Yep, I'm only looking at their current service with the general plan. But it seems, based on just looking at it, it seems that people have kind of stayed with the state if they've been doing that, but
In that all of their 15 years or 13 years were they probation officers. Maybe that's a better way to say it.
yes, in most cases. Some cases they have correctional plan membership, so that I don't know if they started it working in the facility and then transitioned to become a corrections agent. That seems to be a pattern based on the data.
Mhm.
We could literally have potentially 3 pots of money. You could start out in the state. Yeah. You go over to, let's say you're a corrections officer, you could go to the county, and then you'd be in the area corrections plan. And then you might hop back to the state, and then be back in their plan again. You'd have different pots of money, right? And then you have to figure out years of service and all that. And then they'd be getting 2 different checks, right?
Correct. Yeah, so the combined service.
But then it's a combined service of everything when you're hopping back and forth between PERA and MSRs.
We have some ERA, because we have combined service, we do share some data back and forth. But I don't know what jobs they did at PERA. Because that they track things that we do. I don't think they could track everyone's job code and everything.
Yeah, and of course, because of the SERP, right, the 139 titles that are carved into statute, they have the information about like what job titles, right? Because you could conceivably be in the same title and not be in SERP, right? And so this stuff is tracked very, very precisely on the state side. This can be considered if suddenly you're a maintenance supervisor, let's say, and you're working with incarcerated because you're in Stillwater and you move to Faribault and you're not working with incarcerated, you lose participation in service to just the job plan. So there's a lot more finally to like, I know where you've been kind of thing.
If the state tracks that, that's good, but I don't think PERA has because they didn't know who all of us were.
Absolutely not.
And so, and that's where Matt, where you were talking, and you say, is there a savings somewhere? Well, if somebody hasn't been a telecommunicator all of those 20 years, it's only been the last 5, and you actually see my impact, you know, 5 or something. And I don't know how that would be done. So I'm just, all of these discussions just get the mind going.
I'll note from Kara's perspective, it's gonna be very hard for us if we have people that we don't know who have been in that position the entire time. We hope you're not gonna be employer, and the employer would tell us because we don't have that data. As I've talked about,
How would you validate that data?
that would be a challenge. I don't have the answer to that, although I know it would be a challenge because we have that already in other positions that we have.
And to that point, like, for example, I worked at Boys Home, which was correctional, and then I was then probation. So with the change in that plan, when you instituted the correctional plan, that was the employer probably letting you folks know that, hey, there's these amount of people in the correctional company.
Yeah, and I think if I have to double check this, but we have language in the correctional plan that talks about the employer certified position. And that's like what we rely on, then is the employer telling us. We don't have in our system the ability to track job titles. Counties use different job titles to.
On that point, like because right now there's a caveat in telecommunicators and correction plan, if they do something related to.
In the jailer.
Yeah, but is there something we have to do as employers to certify that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we require the employer to certify that. And in the PNF, it's a little different. It's also requires like.
We require the correctional folks and the care folks to certify the 75% as well. So we rely on them, but we also have the job classifications. So not much more. These are the additional examples at different ages, and you can just see it gets progressively more expensive. But I also want to know the person 27 years old with 3 months of service, their difference in present value is still $150,000 at age 55. So even though they're 27, it's still a valuable benefit when you switch from the 66 retirement to the age 55 retirement with the higher multiplier.
Seeing none. Go to 4.5.
This is obviously related, and I think Susan already alluded to what sort of the options are for people needing benefit. Under the federal law requirements, prepare a memo that will go over very briefly for you all. So what the federal law says that employee contributions are permitted tax qualified governmental defined benefit plans. They're mandatory employee contributions and are picked up by the employer. So currently all of the Minnesota state public pension plans meet those 2 requirements. And what that essentially means is that an employee election as to whether and how much salary to contribute to any state pension plan isn't permitted in a pension plan. We're not talking about other types of retirement plans. So you can't pick how much you want to contribute to your pension plan. That's already set, taken out of each paycheck. So what that ultimately means is because not all employees, I'm assuming, and Susan is assuming, will want to purchase credit for past service, or they might not want to purchase the same amounts or percentages. Making sort of any mandatory employee contribution isn't going to be a desirable plan feature. And that ultimately means you can't just put a pot in a pension plan and say, I'm going to put this money in here to purchase my past service in my pension plan. What that does mean, and what Minnesota has, is the deferred compensation plan run by MSRS. And a little bit of background on that for everybody. The plan is administered by MSRS, is available to any time, part-time, temporary public employee, including employees of the state, city, county, township, or school district. Employees can elect any pay that they wish to contribute to the plan, and they may be entitled to a matching contribution. The amount that is contributed is credited to an account in the employee's name. invested at the direction of the employee and then grows tax-free. An employee with an account in the deferred comp plan can elect to transfer funds from deferred comp to the pension plan. That could be to repay a previous refund of employee contributions, purchase credit for past service, or other circumstances. And this can occur during the employee's employment. Lastly, sort of one piece about the deferred comp plan is that if an employer of an employee eligible to participate in one of the new pension plans doesn't currently participate in deferred comp, there is a statute, it's section 352.965, which requires, it's a process for requiring the employer to participate. So pretty sure you have to have a small account in your pension plan to purchase past service. Deferred comp would sort of be that account that you can put money into, or people may already have money in that they can then transfer over to use. And so I think that answers maybe one of Doug's questions on his last slide about can it be an automatic plan provision? But the answer is no, it can't be in this new plan. It would have to be sort of an outside account, but not a pension plan. I can answer questions.
And maybe this doesn't apply, but this isn't saying that the legislature can't suddenly say, hey, we found this $12 million that we want to give you as a gift to put towards purchasing past service credit for members or to put towards something.
Right, this has nothing to do with how it actually gets paid for. Yeah, it's just what account is it coming from? If it's coming from a member, you can't just do credit.
Do we know if there's any limits to how much you can pull from the deferred comp?
Don't believe there are any limits.
Okay, it's not like a yearly, not part of the contributions limit.
Actually, I looked into this a little bit too. It just can't be the employer funded part, it's your part portion that you put into.
Yeah, we would require, in order to do the purchase of service or fund or whatever, we would require something from the entity, like PERA would have to provide a letter to find the cost. So we have it in the documentation form and then it's a process. Plan that you purchase the service.
But the amount you can contribute is subject to the IRS regulations, right? You can't contribute beyond.
So your contribution limit is established by the IRS and your age. But the purchase of service is not linked to that limit.
So that would not be that would just be people's existing MSRS deferred comp plan. It's not like people would have to create another deferred comp. It would be the type of thing where money that people have had in there would, if you created this process, would then, they could utilize what they already have going.
Or increase their contributions. We don't do that and have.
Moving right along. Now we're in bullet point 6, other public safety adjacent positions. We already had the memo in the handout from the forensic scientists. There is now law enforcement administrative professions. Does everybody have a copy of that, or it's up? Did everybody get a chance to read that? I believe we do have somebody on Teams, but if we have specific questions regarding that memo, we can give you standard questions. So, does anybody have any questions before we get into the
I do have a question about the forensic scientists. I thought that Leah had said that there were approximately 280 forensic scientists as part of BCA, and I didn't ever see any materials. Like, I was of the understanding she provided that at some point.
I think that number might have come from including those other groups that someone had mentioned in the last meeting, like IT professionals and administrative type of staff. But from our numbers, what we gathered with the position that we had listed out, it was under 350 total. So I don't.
That's on both the para and the MSRS side, okay.
Any other questions? I'm gonna stand on its own then. And then I guess we'll open the conversation of should we include these groups in the intervention?
When we looked into our plan, the last one that we brought forward that was going to be funded by the employees, we did not include clerical, and we did not, and they're not included in any of our numbers now. So this is a leap for me. Because if that's the case, then we need to open up the doors to my clerical staff as well, because they're seeing the same people at the front that these people are dealing with. So I understand it's frustrating, but I do think that it's hard if we continue to have groups come forward. We're never going to get anywhere with this. And our direction was 911, probation, 911, and to see if we believe that others. So I'm just voicing that I think it's just a bridge too far.
I mean, just on that, when my colleague and I started this whole process of determining and eventually being another plan, our original intent was to get forensic scientists or science professionals have field response work. During our meeting with legislator that we were working with, we informed that para said that job titles were easier to move to plan versus duties. That's why we came up with the entire list of all the duties, because, you know, depending on if you work at the state or the county or the city level, you know, your job titles are the same or different, but your roles are sometimes the same. So trying to find, you know, we didn't want to be like the end all be all, obviously, to figure out which ones are to be included. But we included all those forensic roles that are working with materials and, you know, going through processing evidence and going out to the field. In terms of the other groups, I don't say on that memo there, we didn't include, our intention wasn't to include any type of clerical staff.
Susan's not here. My question is, if we had legislatively, because they've given us some marching orders, statute to form this group, are we gonna have issues to expand and bring something too big back? These parameters, but now you guys are out here.
I'll leave it to Alina to answer the question, but I do believe there is a hole to add.
Yeah, the mandate does say that the work group is to consider any other public safety adjacent positions and whether they should be included. So I think the work group is safe to say, if you did add in other groups besides probation and 911. We did that under this provision, you know, so that's allowed. But obviously the intent was probation and 911 were the two main ones. But I think the legislature didn't know what other ones could be out there. And I think there was some conversation in one of the meetings about, do you just start with a smaller group and in the future try to add more, knowing that if you try to add in too many at one point, does that get to be too much, too big of a path to cross? That was just a conversation had in one of the meetings. But so I don't think that's a concern that you'll push back on, at least that front.
Yeah, I mean, that's my concern. It's been going on for years, especially with trying to get telecommunicators, the pension side of things. And now it just keeps getting bigger and bigger, and I don't want anything to stall out. That's my concern. If you get this too big, are they going to be gun shy on passing anything? And if they're okay with it, I have no problem with it. But if we're not going to get anything in the end zone, then I would have an issue.
And I think Susan's, I know I've said this to this group before, is if this group can come to a decision, it'll be that much easier for the legislature to just go with what this group has decided. They trust all of your opinions and suspect. well thought out and taken a lot of meetings to look at all the information. So I think if this group can get there, I think that's at least very cool and getting the legislature there, but it's getting this group to.
Because then it's gonna come down to, yeah. How do we figure that out and track it?
I appreciate the conversation. They're not easy. Each of the groups here has a really tough job. And frankly, the county employment and county employees have really tough jobs. To be transparent, respectable groups here, I just want to let folks know kind of how our employer group is thinking of it. We're still divided. That was in our first initial presentation for counties. We're going to be meeting actually Nicole, Tammy, Joe, myself, David are going to be meeting with our membership 200 commissioners next week to talk about this and talk about perspectives at our fall policy conference and hopefully give us space to continue working proactively toward a solution. Two groups that our members have been very aware of and educated on are probation and telecommunicators. I think they would be surprised about other groups, and I think concerns about this expanding to include all public service will be, there'll be an exclamation mark next to that if others are brought into it. And the last thing I'd say is that I do think that in the legislative context is really important, but remember, I just think back to the conversations that were had. Folks were in that room, a lot of folks were in that room that night. We were there at almost midnight. So the conversations weren't necessarily all fluid at times. And I think that they are looking to us to say that legislators plural thought this way, I think would be a stretch. I think some legislators actively wanted forensics scientists included, while others might not have had that strong of an. So I think I appreciate the legislature giving us that flexibility to have those conversations regardless of where we go. Even if there's minority reports or something, there should be something on the record showing kind of what everyone is thinking.
Here, I agree with everything that is said, and I also look to the forensic people, and this is a very tough conversation. You know, in light of the recent shootings, you know, forensics people were out there on the scene in horrific circumstances. They are on the front lines. I just think, you know, to what Jim said, you know, we vetted the telecommunicators for a long time. We vetted the probation and parole. And, you know, to look at the forensic people, you know, we vetted, you know, maybe we belonged in corrections or maybe we belong in police and fire. Came out, no, we're back here. The same conversation perhaps needs to be done for forensics. Is another one the correct one for them, or eventually it's the correct one for them here? I don't have enough information. I know I've worked with forensic people alongside of them and with them through my 32-year career and admire what they do. They're in public safety. Where do they belong? I can't say where they belong. I know where telecommunicators belong, you know, I thought in other places, but today we're left here. We worked long and hard to get here. And I've spent a gap full of years that we probably won't get that past service and yet to be determined. And those are gone, where we could have been put someplace else. So I am very empathetic to the situation. But I too very much worried that if we blow this up, that we won't get to the end zone as.
I appreciate that. That's taken up, of course, at all. The only thing I would just, I guess, kind of add is that being forensic professionals, again, varying county, city, statewide, is that we don't have a group to necessarily represent for all different unions. So the fact that we got in here to be able to be on this work group is an accomplishment, and we're happy about that. We appreciate that. But we just hope, you know, if anything, at the bare minimum, just to consider adding field-based forensic scientists, ones that work, again, working in the field, going to this mass shooting, being there for 12 hours, dealing with all these types of scenes, day in and day out, you know, summer, winter, many hours outside, you know, hazardous chemicals all the time. The drills people could be.
Yes, what I'm looking for is a little direction. Group, we can all stand here and sit on our hands and not with the heart. by vote. Each group, but I do believe that we owe it to these groups to give them an answer. I hear what you need more information. I guess my pushback would be what additional information do you and decide that, let's get that information. And they're either with us or they're not, and then we can move on to the greater plan. So I think you guys all heard me last time I share this, like if we start certainly putting in general, and that's not. So we have to be very circumspect. Somebody, Devin first. I'll go ahead and you can speak.
Apologies, I'm driving currently to Indiana and just had to pull over. For those who I haven't really talked to, I'm Devin with MAPE. We represent the state forensic scientists, and nothing would make me happier than to include them in this round. But my concern is, oh, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah. Perfect. I'm with MAPE. We represent the state forensic scientists at the BCA, and nothing would make me happier currently for them to be included. But I also think of the folks that we've been carrying for over 22 years on the corrections agent side and building the case for including them. So my concern would be adding and broadening this outside of this work group. I think a great case could be made for them over time. But I do agree with, and I hate myself for saying this, with the counties and some of the employer groups about the concerns about broadening this weight beyond what we had discussed, what we had been advocating for. And for full disclosure, my folks were reaching out to me asking me why they weren't reached out to for inclusion in this. It was because the broadening of the scope beyond 911 telecommunicators and probation agents was added last minute. And so my concern is that we don't have the case, and this could actually kill a bill that has much broader support as we are coming out of the session. So I think we should at least try and make a decision now. And I agree. And that's all I got.
Thank you, sir. Amy, do you have anything? That's
I move that we stay with some groups.
stay with the two telecommunicators. Okay. Back to a formal thing, we have a motion. Is there a second?
Don't need a second.
All right. Any discussion on that? Put everybody on the hot seat here. So all in favor of that motion? I would appreciate you raise your hand. The motion is to stay with the two groups, telecommunicators and probation. All right, all in favor, raise your hands, please. Okay, 14 opposed. All right. I think we have that. So we just answered that question. Yes.
If I may, I would just suggest that you heard what everybody said here, Josh, and I believe that we all would support you, especially coming forward. It's just the idea of the fact that this is where we started and we've come this far. So I just want to make a mention to that, and the idea that going forward in the future doesn't mean we're not supporting you, and that maybe listening and staying around wouldn't be bad either.
We appreciate that. And like I said, we were kind of thrown in last minute. This started in January and it just happened so quick. We didn't even know this group was being formed at all. And again, we were just thrown in and didn't even expect to be on this, to be funding all this. So I appreciate it listening to hear what
And I learned a lot that I didn't know about. I mean, I walked out after your presentation and went, wow, I didn't know that that existed. And I appreciate that. It's just that one of the things, as you just heard everybody say, some of us have been working on this for almost 30 years.
And
If I just add to this. I'm being president, but not include any worker. So hopefully we advocate it's on the way, but I'm feeling kind of bad about that. And just making sure that we get something past budget.
Yeah, I have one other comment. I do think that, you know, we kind of, there's like the support side of the house. And that's the huge part of your position. Whether they're community service officers, clerical, whatever, there's a ton of those positions out there. It'd be nice if we'd have the same committee for all those groups, you know, not right now, obviously, but in the legislature, if we could get that passed in this next session and create the same kind of committee to be doing the same things. I think that makes more sense. Then we can gather all that data ahead of time for Era and SRS and come in with the information at hand. I think that will be
Great. Anybody else? Okay. Next meeting. That's where we're at. So the next meeting, we discussed this at the last meeting with the co-chairs and the LCPR staff. The LCPR staff will take care of, if we do come to an agreement, the actual legislation side of writing it. But there is the other side of writing kind of a memo to the legislators, to the LCPR committee members, and giving them kind of the background and where we're at, how we got to that point. And so we're looking to groups to start that process, or once we come to an agreement on, if we do get to a global agreement on it, is to look to you guys to be part of writing those memos to the legislators, explaining what we got, give kind of the background and everything. So does that sum it up, Andrew? Yeah. So we don't have to decide that today. I think that'll start if we get through everything at our next meeting. If we get through all that, then we can start having that conversation then. I think that's hopeful, but be prepared. We might have to have that conversation. Thanks. Does anybody have anything else before we adjourn?
I just have one thing.
Yes, ma'am.
Do we know the dates for October and November? Okay, is there any way we can get those kind of locked in sooner than later?
I think that's a problem. I'm a big fan of that.
Yeah, the further up the better.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree. Just so that we can make sure that we can have strong membership each
Yeah.
day.
I think those meetings will be impactful in terms of the output of the group, so we'll get those as soon as we can.
And just so everyone knows, I will be remote for November, almost the whole month of it, but I will be there and I'll be ready.
So what I think we'll do is the chairs will put up some dates and try to keep it on this every 2-week kind of time frame. I think that seems to be working, and we can go from there. Any other questions or statements?
Mr. Chair, I'm just wondering if, since we have time, if we not want to maybe jump ahead and go through these definitions, instead of holding it over till the next meeting?
I am fine with that.
Yeah, I know. And you guys have all read it, but sure. Okay, so now that we kind of know what our two groups are, we can jump down to the third, which is that the employee must first satisfy the definition of state employee or public employees as already in the statutes. And we've included at the end, and that's what most of this memo is, if it looks daunting, what the current statutes say about membership in general and MSR. And so maybe what is most prudent is actually going into my definitions. The second and third, and I think fourth pages, and sort of the options that I've laid out. And just hear people's comments. So I'm happy to just kind of read out what they are and where I got them from, and then just kind of open each one up for discussion unless they think that there's a better way to really go about this. Okay, so these are just focusing on probation officer definitions. So for an MSRS subplan, probation agency employee means a state employee as defined in section 352.01, who is a probation or supervisory officer, supervisory staff member, or program manager, provides community supervision services or oversees the delivery of probation services. And then very similar for a PARA administered plan, just a different section number. And so these definitions were included in the bill that we had last session. And considered at the commission. So I did not make any changes to those, and that's what those definitions came from. Option 2, again, very similar for MSRS and PARA. I defined it as a probation officer means a state employee who enhances public safety by directly supervising probation or parole clients or supervises employees under eligible. This would try to make sure that supervisors are included if that is sort of the goal. But provide sort of a definition when I went online looking at Minnesota probation officer job postings that are current as of right now, trying to understand job duties. How could I define this broadly but narrowly at the same time? That would be as a different option than what was in the bill. And then option 3 looks very similar to option 2. But I included in the language whose primary responsibility. And I don't know, as an attorney, that's tough for me to write what does primary responsibility mean and who's going to determine that. But I don't know if you don't have it in there, could you have someone who does something for one day? And that's where I don't know your guys' roles and your day-to-day well enough to, say what these should look like. But that's sort of my smattering of what I came up with for probation officer. 911 communicator was very similar. The first option was what we got from her presentation, the definition that she gave us. The other two came, from very similar things, looking at job postings, also looking at other states, and sort of the difference between 2 and 3 is that primary responsibility language. So I feel like there could be a lot to process there, but I'm happy to sort of hear thoughts if one sticks out or you see something right away that's just glaringly wrong, or how I could combine anything to sound better. I'm going to do
I have a couple of comments if I could. I would stay away from primary. We had to change this in the police and fire plan where it was like less than or more than 50%. So if you're gonna say primary, pick a number and then use that number would be my input there. Also in the PNF plan, there is an opportunity for part-time police and fire to be in the police and fire if the city or the government entity does a resolution. That's something to, if you have part-time people to consider. And lastly, we appreciate the language in the correctional plan that talks about the employer certifying. So with these positions and maybe us not being able to get the data that we need, that employer certification, I think in both of these definitions would be appreciated.
Clear in 33-201, what's a state employee? Pulled it up, it seems to be like state. What are we looking at? What was a state? I think it's Minnesota in it. I was curious. There's a lot of subdivisions, 23. Just curious about, is literally state employee.
So is everything that's listed there. Subdivision 2 and then 2A actually lists out who the included employees are. Mhm.
And for the state employee definition, subdivision 2 is really the broad term, any the state employees. There's some specific included employees because like the Historical Society isn't a state agency or the University of Minnesota, there's a different process for them to be included. So some of these entities are quasi-state entities. So that's why they're specifically listed in 2A. And then 2B is the excluded folks. So trainees and student workers and those sorts of things. So state employee would include the corrections agents and then 911. I can't remember the classification for the 911 folks.
How would it be determined for, we've got some different entities out there, like Veteran. My understanding, that's not employees of the state of Minnesota, correct?
Right, they fall into that kind of quasi-state, so they do participate in our general plan, but the police both participate in PNF.
So do we have to specifically those that are got a little bit of a twist to them? Do we have to verbally identify them in the definition? Because there's 3 or 4 of them that, yeah, the MAC, U of L.
And Dakota was the joint powers. I worry that might need to find in the subdivision of public as well. I still is a joint powers.
Yeah, we've got some, it's on the correction side of the house too, like there's tri-county corrections, it's like 3 counties that. It's so how would that work for Rice Steel? Just want to make sure they don't get left out. They're employed by.
Yeah,
They are, for sure, yeah.
Under public employee area, that's.
For the PNF plan, those positions are specifically in our definition section or in the membership section. So we have pension coverage for certain state military officials, department firefighters, we have coverage for certain metropolitan and the police officers. Those are specifically listed in the PNF statute as being eligible.
And I can speak to, oh, sorry, I can speak to the joint powers for the corrections. So I worked for joint powers, and we were county employees, and our paycheck came from one of the 3 counties. So we were easy to define.
Maybe need to understand. Much of the supervisor. Counties for the dispatch supervisor. That's a tiny slice of everything that they do. And so under these definitions, they be in the plan or out of the plan, they should be in the plan or not.
So.
Comment on that.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chair. So in some of those other smaller counties where they might be a communication supervisor, they're also the jail administrator, so they might already be in the corrections plan. And I really like, I think it's Amy that said this, then that we really look to the certification of it by the employer of what their primary function is. I mean, when you get to the larger in the metro, like myself, I mean, that's my whole job is managing the 911 center. But you're absolutely right. In smaller ones, they have a dual roles, triple roles. Some might be an emergency manager, radio manager, and the communications manager. So it does vary. So I like the certification piece. I will definitely say option number 1 for the definition of public safety telecommunicator was very well vetted in a previous working group back in 2021. So I like that definition. Have no issue though with adding certification to it. But I think we really need to look to make sure that we're not missing those primary, secondary PSAPs, that might be those joint powers or the little one-offs in MSRS for the state definition of a state employee.
Yeah, I would just say, I would encourage you guys to take a look at the P and F definitions, because they do address situations in which you have a full-time firefighter or police officer who has other responsibilities. And that's where we got into like that 50% kind of role. So like that way, that can maybe speak to some of the supervisory or other roles. If they have at least 50%, they would be considered.
So wonder if like, when Selena and other attorneys here that directly supervise these process, I think the legislature had direct probation telecommunicators at front of mind when they were thinking about enhanced benefits. I don't know that they had deputy county administrators. Or even as I read definition 1, potentially the commissioner of corrections. If at the end of the day, they're supposed to be supervising the entire staff, I mean, what does that definition actually mean? Would they fall in that?
So MSRS's preference is to have those specific job classifications. I know Susan isn't always a fan of that, but it is the most clear the who's in and who's out, and where you get into like the supervisor and manager, and how far up the chain you go. And that's all the data we provided is based on certain classifications. So that would be our preference. I think DOC has that.
And as I'm like sitting here thinking about this, the amount or percentage, I'm reflecting on serve rate. What is the threshold is 75% of direct contact with incarcerated persons, right? So that's how they get there. So it seems to me that seems, you know, is it's good enough for serve, be good enough in this circumstance as well, and would maybe flesh out some of those. And maybe this is just an MSRS side of it, but I know that when Leah was talking about the telecommunicators and the supervisors, it is not uncommon that those supervisors will get pulled in onto shifts, right? And will cover, and so they're performing those duties. I don't know if they're doing it at a 75% level, but that would be a direct first line supervisor. It would be, you know, like up the food chain. And I think when we talked about titles, it was like the first line, but I'm contemplating that 75% and that direct contact like language might be useful, just something to think about. I haven't thought about it a lot, but it just for what it's worth, it might be advantageous to write that down.
I think it's harder for us to use direct titles. We don't get those.
Right. Oh, and that's definitely for you, that like that preference. For our staff titles, because it works.
It works, yeah, that's.
I don't know.
I'm envious of it.
Titles, because if you just take dispatch, for example, you've got dispatch administrator, dispatch manager, dispatch lead, dispatch lieutenant, dispatch sergeant, telecommunicator, call taker. I mean, there's a zillion different job titles.
But in the state, or just broadly, because in the state, there's only a handful.
Right,
Yeah.
but
Yeah,
I'm
so-
talking like on the para side, it's wide open
Yeah.
because there's only a few small dispatch groups in the MSRS side of it, but.
And I'm not suggesting it for the folks.
Actually, I'll comment on both two things. First, I think we could probably take some of what comes out of police and fire as a really good line here, because I would tell you one of the things to think about is if you don't go up that chain, you're not going to have anybody wanting to promote. So you're going to have a problem with people not wanting to promote, and you're never going to tell a police chief or a sheriff that you're out of the retirement system because you promoted up. That's just not something that would ever be considered. And you're not probably going to ask them, are you spending 75% of the time in the car, or are you sitting behind your desk talking to people? So you're going to run into issues sometimes. And when we're talking about probation officers in particular, especially when we're talking about the paperwork going to court, sometimes they're not having direct contact with offenders. They might be sitting in a courtroom. That might not be considered direct contact, but that's still a huge requirement of their job. or they might, there's lots of pieces of what a probation officer does that may not fit that 75% contact. They also change over time that I want you to consider, and that would pull people, a probation officer, in and out of the plan so often that you would not. I actually, for my staff, I actually rotate them in and out of different roles in our office so that they don't get burnt out. Well, all of a sudden now I'm not going to have anybody in certain roles because, well, does that give me 75% of client contact or does that not? So that would really create a lot of issues in our departments. They have specific roles. And I think clarifying our roles and following some of the police and fire distinguishing things. I mean, you can't really ask firemen, are you spending 75% of your time in a fire?
All the time.
I mean, it's just sometimes, I mean, I understand why we're trying to define some of this down, but at the same time, the probation officer roles are so complex. And they have so many different roles doing so many different things. I think we would really struggle if we tried to bring it down that low.
To answer that.
Sure, and I think Tammy Jo hit a lot of that in her comments too. Sorry, Courtney Jasper, professional walker of the group. I work with the Minnesota Corrections Association of MAPCO. And Tammy Jo hit a lot of it. We contemplated and we spent time on our definition, and I understand that it's not perfect. And I would suggest that the probation group might be willing to get together as the folks who do this work and look at potentially that P&F language and see if there's something we can bring forward at that next group. But for us, one thing that was really important was including those supervisors. To your point, Paula, I don't think that we certainly didn't contemplate the commissioner of corrections. We didn't go that far. But we contemplated supervisors because we wanted to make sure that one, folks were still, they weren't looking and going, well, I'm going to get a better benefit. I don't want to go into supervisory roles. We don't want to lose talent there. But also there's a lot of counties, especially our smaller counties, where supervisors are spending a significant amount of time in their field. So that was kind of how we came to the definition that we came to. And I think that our group would be happy to work on a definition before that next meeting, if that's helpful.
Okay. Devin, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to concur with what was already said, which is why I put it down as like I appreciate the reference to SERP, having worked on that with folks who are in the room. The 75% contact, that's mostly for facilities where it's a lot more predictable. Caseloads change, jurisdictions themselves, the districts change. So it's just not applicable and wouldn't be supported.
So I just kind of after here. Go ahead.
One more comment to kind of direct Mr. Chair at that. Do you think there would be employers, a county commissioner or board who says, we don't want to pay this for our telecommunicators, we don't believe, so we're not going to certify them?
I don't think so. I think I'm just struggling a little bit because I agree with the flexibility of the situation. Like, caseload is going to change, their caseload supervision. It's going to change throughout their career. You're going to have years where you're going to have tough nights. And I also know by talking to Nicole and others that some supervisors, especially in smaller counties, mid-sized counties, are getting called to actually help with that caseload, or take some of the toughest clients. So certainly the goal would be to cover that. But I also think that supervisory roles are different by their structure. And if you are in an office environment where you aren't supervising directly, if you're not helping out, if you're not seeing those clients, I just wonder, can we talk about that a little bit? I think there's two things that we're wanting to do. We're wanting to make sure that for the average probationary employee, the definition isn't necessarily tied to the 75% and it's fluid. Great. I think everyone's on board to figure that out. The second question is how to get those supervisors who are directly supervising probation staff and helping assist or stepping in for that caseload, but aren't necessarily at deputy county admin level. Some of the larger counties making close to $200,000 and not having caseload. That is a different type of employment that I don't think we would want to cover.
Sorry, I'm actually going to question Matt on this. This is fun. But is there a county where a probation supervisor is the deputy county administrator? I mean, or is that just a random example?
That was an example that we just had last, 2 days ago when Joe was on the call. I think it's something that I want to just
But just to make sure that it doesn't go that high.
And also, like, is there something wrong with saying direct supervision, directly supervising the probation employee? To just really clarify that it's not 2 tiers above or 1 tier above, and more counties there might not be tiers above you, but in other counties there might be 2 or 3.
Right. So obviously, yeah, I'm a small county and I end up covering a caseload often enough. I don't have concerns. But I think like counterparts, Dakota County, Hennepin County, there's layers there, but there's layers for a reason. So that a supervisor of a manager of 40 people or 30 people can help and work that out. So I just don't want us to be too prescriptive, maybe, on that as well. If we can find a nice middle ground of, I don't know what that is, I guess, but.
I'm trying to think in my mind too. Let's say that you were in Dakota County, and let's say that, for an example, you spent 20 years as a probation officer or even direct supervisor. You would be, if this plan was in place, you would be receiving credits during that. But let's say your last 5 years was at a deputy level county administrator. What would happen in that case? Would you still be able to?
If this new plan had existed, your service as a probation officer would be in the new plan. And then you go to the general plan, you earn a benefit in the general plan, and as you say, you know.
Matt, in that example, you're saying that person is out of corrections now.
No, that you would have said, I'm a supervisor, I started as a probation officer. I worked 20 years with clients directly. I even maybe was that direct supervisor of a division or 40 employees at Dakota. And then I'm pulled up to public safety, or let's say that there's a department level deputy county administrator for public safety, et cetera, where the job is still to supervise probation and clients or correction, community correction services. At that point, are they included in this definition or not? And if they're not, they're still ostensibly receiving the benefit for those 20 years where they were in that new benefit, but then they go back their last year of 5 years of service to the general plan. I'm just trying to think out loud, like how that will potentially work.
They no longer.
Yeah, they no longer qualify.
And would the employer be able to just certify that?
Yeah.
I mean,
Good question.
And maybe sorry, just ask. I was from the head, but maybe like public safety, the Department of Public Safety might have examples of that we can look at, because they had probably those exact same scenarios of people being in those types of roles. Or like I said, the fire and, I don't, these aren't new problems, I don't think. These are positions. I mean, I would guess that there's even police chiefs who moved into mayor roles in some of these smaller areas or something, right? So we could probably look and see where some of those things roll into.
And with fire marshals, what happens with them on the city side of the equation? Are they remain in police and fire? Okay.
If I can clarify that one, and that's new in the last couple of years, because we found that there were some folks who were promoted to those positions and then were getting either booted out of the plan or having to decline the offer of a promotion because they wanted to be able to stay in their plan. So we're trying to avoid that happening here.
Yes, this is all because of the primary.
Well, I was just gonna say, we have examples of that where like corrections, where they are in the correctional plan working directly with the incarcerated folks, then get promoted to higher positions, and then they may not be covered by the plan because the warden is not in the correctional plan. So they would have that period in corrections that they've earned. It would be calculated like it was shown earlier, and then they'd have that mixed service where their high five would apply to both. So it would actually improve their correctional plan benefit, even though it's the general plan, because they have that higher high five. That makes sense.
Matt, you have your, no.
So I have been working in Ramsey County, and I think probably with Hennepin too. I mean, the larger the county, the more layers we have. But like I'm the probation officer, I have a direct supervisor who is involved in my caseload. But then we have another person above well, my supervisor could be who's actively involved. I mean, we have, incidents where they're coming running, they're down the hall. There's a few layers, I think, for the larger counties. So I think that those are good questions to kind of sort out. I would also I think we've maybe moved on from on the para side from the idea of a percentage. When I testified before the commission and stuff like that, we talked about it's the immersion in the whole material. So the amount of my time with somebody who's on my caseload might be a certain amount, but the time that I'm in that material, preparing, talking to the victim on the phone, it's the totality of the whole process. That's the reason we believe that this makes sense, that there would be a better pension improvement. And then just finally, there is a lot, I know Tammy Jo kind of referenced it, that we move around a lot. So a lot of people start off as assistant probation officers, they're having direct client contact. And I believe our belief is that they would be very much involved in this pension. And then you might go into a temporary training spot and stuff. The whole idea is you use your experience to promote, to assist the probation department from many different facets over a career. And I think it would be very important that we would include those people as part of this.
Oh, I'm sorry. I think Aaron, you might have to help me here. So it's not as fluid as maybe I articulated, because there is staticness, like it's an annual kind of, like there's the floating in and out of serve versus non-serve is not as fluid as maybe I've expressed. It's like an annual thing, and I'm not gonna do it justice. So I don't know if you can help me out here in kind of that percentage.
Yeah, so the employer certifies the participation in the program because they have 75% contact. We're not going to audit that, I guess. But the employer is required to update the position descriptions every 2 years. And if they demonstrate that, or if they think that the person's longer falls under 75% contact, there's a mechanism where they bring it forward and remove them from the plan, and then the employee has to do it. So there's a process. And most folks don't change much unless they're getting a different job position and it's not.
Right.
And every time they switch jobs, that is kind of evaluated.
And the state is better about writing down PD as well. Sometimes but like they have PDs that are unique for the individual that's possessing the classification. And if you've got county employees, right? I mean, you're not doing that. You have one description. But it might be useful too, and I'm just going to offer that this is maybe a possible place that you could look if you're looking at some of these definitions, right? Everybody has to report on their pay equity, right? So we match, or the local governments need to do the matching of the positions in order to report pay equity. So some of the job duties, classification stuff, local governments will look to that tool to support kind of the matching of it. So I don't know if that might be a useful guidance that you could perhaps,
Final comment. Karen does not want to be looking at job descriptions to determine who is in the plan. I think it was said in the memo that it should not be the plan to determine that. We got into that situation of the police and fire plan of having to review position descriptions because of that primary language, and we would really prefer not to enter into a situation in which employers are sending us job descriptions to see whether or not they fit.
suggestion was for the legislative articulation, right? To write it in the definition in a way that might, and maybe it's not useful, but it's just it's a possibility.
So I think what I'm hearing is that we have a couple of different hurdles we gotta deal with, and I think the best path forward is everybody can get together as groups in terms like telecommunicators, come up with your best ideas of what you would like to see, your ideal definitions. Then we can just kind of do a line by line at the next meeting and say, we agree upon this, but we don't agree upon that, and then try to come to a common ground. Does everybody think that's fair?
It's a good idea.
To do that. And this is a very good discussion and I appreciate it. I think that the issues of people coming in and out of the plan is a big issue. And promotability is another big issue too. So keep that stuff in mind. So you'll have some homework to do for next meeting, but I think it should be a good start. I appreciate you bringing up Darlene, that good primer and save us some time for the next meeting. So.
Yeah, I got it.
Does anybody else have anything else before we adjourn for the day? Perfect. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah.